magazine boxes that are four-cornered or four enclosed. And brother, you need to open up your books and stuff so I know what's in there, so I can tell what some of the stuff you set the stuff up. And now don't put the barber out. Now you can't close the barber down because the barber was cutting hair in the corner. The barber got hair up. He cut hair there. So you can come on this side. You want to come right there. Huh? Shut the barber down. You all right? You got a way to do it? Okay, a brother brings some good used books, and I know it's hard for them to come in from Baltimore, but some of those books are very important to some of the things I'm talking about. And last week he gave me the copy of Cornel West and Henry Louis Gates, and I spent the next day reading it, Bob. I read it all the next day, and it inspired me a whole week of discussion. I've been Carter G. Woodson all week. I've been Emmitt Scott. I've been James Moorland. Interesting, you know, Moorland is the Moorland Spingarn Library. Is Moorland white or black? White. He's white.
He's black.
He's black. This man.
He had a collection.
He had a black father and a white mother, but his father's name, Moore, M-O-R-E, was Moore, M-O-R-E. I believe it was probably more of M-O-O-R, because when James, his son, gets a name, he drops the E and goes M-O-O-R, more, and adds land, and becomes Moorland. But it was more. Something's up in there. His daddy was, I'm going to get into that. I'll get into that with you. There's some excellent sources. I really want to make sure that I have time to read these things into the record, some of them of such great detail. Now, another thing I want to do with you tonight, as I look over and the Boule is talking about the climate in which they were created in as one thing, simultaneously I want to walk you over to, Carter G. Woodson is trying to get some money from Abraham Flexner at the Rockefeller Foundation. If I go over to murder by injection, I can read where Abraham Flexner is preoccupied at this period that Carter G. Woodson is trying to get money from him in setting up the AMA, pulling skullduggery on the natural doctors, overthrowing them with the quack white doctors that they were setting up. Right. So what we need to do is to walk through. We need to take Carol Quigley is talking about one period in time. As Carol Quigley talks about who the power people are at this period in time, we understand that the forces on Carter G, the forces on Garvey, or the Alain Locke, the forces that produce an Alain Locke, etc., are all coming out of this climate that Quigley describes in terms of the consolidation of the rich and the powerful at that moment in time, a very critical moment, as they went from the late 1800s to 1933 to establish worldwide power, what it meant at that period for them to come forth, and that these brothers were trying to come up amongst this. If I never get to any of this in the lecture, Carter G. Woodson, I have to give some of my strongest support and respect for several reasons. Not only did he say he wished that these Negroes didn't kiss the ass of the whites to get the grant money, because when it came to him, they expected him to kiss the ass because the others had kissed the ass. And he found it was hard, and he got, say, $25,000 from the Carnegie Foundation. He got $37,000 from the Laura Spelman Fund. He got $25,000 from the Rockefeller Foundation. But as soon as he didn't do what they asked him to do, or as soon as they kept telling him, well, we need you to merge your research with that of Robert Moulton at Tuskegee. We know Moulton to be a spy. Right. Carter G don't know that, but Carter says, I ain't working with that damn fool. I'll never work with him. And he lost a grant, big $25,000, not to work with Moulton. We know Moulton a spy. He didn't know. He just watched Moulton. Though they was in the same fraternity, he wouldn't work with him. And they told Carter G, we won't give you money unless you work with a Negro who we approve of. Then they started establishing white scholars who Carter G would have to have his money dispensed to him through white scholars. A man named Park at University of Chicago. Carter G was one of the earlier master's degree graduates out of University of Chicago. So he's in Chicago, 1907, 1908, 1909. One of the things I'm also very impressed with is the role of the YMCA in nigger life in the late 1800s, 1900s. The role of a YMCA as a place where blacks could go live for a limited amount of money the Young Men's Christian Association, and that Charles Wesley and many of these others had positions in the YMCA. Moorland was the head of the YMCA movement. Well, Moorland is in the middle of all of that because he was very instrumental in the bringing forth of it. You'll run into a man's name named Work, W-O-R-K, another social scientist during that period. What did it mean when Du Bois set the criteria by which sociological studies on Negroes would be established? And it was, again, the type of study that said 14 police, 44 media executives, 22 business executives, 13 plumbers, 22 carpenters. The sociological study that whites wanted from blacks was a study that told who all of the blacks were in a particular area, what all of them were doing. That was a sociological study that the whites wanted to fund. Carter G wanted to do some shit on Kemet. He said, I got some shit on Luxor. They said, no, that position will get Alain Locke. Interestingly enough, I saw some shit where they said that the deal was in making Alain Locke, the first Rhodes Scholar, was that he would be the only black Rhodes Scholar until he died. And it's interesting in the biography of him and written by two Howard people, Ray Logan and Michael Winston, both Boules. Both, huh? Both Boules. Hebrew used to go with Winston's daughter, who was a jazz singer. Turned into a freak or something. When y'all freaking or something? Huh? Did you bring me the profile of her?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, yeah. You don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. All right? Sherry, well, okay, I see. Now you remember. Yeah, Sherry Winston, right? And that, only a minute ago. Okay. Well, in the profile that they wrote in the Encyclopedia, excellent book. I got these from Brother Nati, and I'm going to go through a couple of the profiles. The Dictionary of American Negro Biography. And not being one big in the Negro things, I'm starting to get my Negro thing really tightened up because I got the Negroes really down now. But the role of the Negro, see, you got to understand, Du Bois, and I have to correct things that I've said in my tapes in the past. I said in the past that the Talented Tim speech was given in 1910 at the Boule Convention, and that's not true. If what Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West are saying in their book, The Future of the Race, the original Du Bois Talented Tim speech was written in 1903. It was revised for the Boule Convention of 1948. And Du Bois's concept of the Talented Tim, as all emphasizes, I look back through the Boule material, they always emphasize Du Bois. They always emphasize Du Bois' emphasis of that the lot of black people will be risen by that 10% educated class, the educated black elite. Remember, we had established in the past that when the whites, rich whites, coalesced with the earlier blacks, there were not rich blacks. So rich whites coalesced with educated blacks because there was no class of rich blacks yet. So it was an unequal relationship. Now we have the great white foundations coming together. We got the Federal Reserve over there incubating. We got the America under massive transformation. Simultaneously, you got these blacks organizing. The blacks, as I'm reading carefully into the role of Locke and all of the earlier Boule, the blacks worked very hard at convincing the whites that they were the blacks to be counted on. That the destiny of black people, the guarantee that black people would be primed for that which whites wanted. That they would guarantee this. Before I go any further, just to give you a glimpse so that I don't miss any of this tonight, let me take you to a period where Carter G. Strike. Marcus Garvey is looming on the horizon, and whites are getting ready for World War I, and they want to build the appropriate consensus in the black community to support World War I without bringing up the unfair treatment that blacks were subjected to as a result of being looked at as less than a white man. These documents, and I just wanted to make sure I do this so that I don't miss it, and we're early, so I can be able to do this and get back into the larger flow. This is, we heard before about Spingarn. Remember, the library at Howard is Moorland Spingarn, and all of them. Spingarn is very fascinating, Moorland is fascinating, all of their histories, their interrelationships. Carter G. Woodson broke up his relationship with Moorland because he felt Moorland was too trusting of white people. And he wrote him a letter, said, you trust any cheap hunky you can find. He said hunky, but he said something like that. And he said, your unblinded loyalty to cheap white men against the intellectual Negro, you are a threat to our neighborhood. And he cuts his relationship. He kicks Moorland off of the journal of his Association of Study of African American History. He knocks him off the board secretly. Now this is Spingarn Emmitt Scott preparing for this conference of editors. See, I looked up. See, the reason I'm down here so he don't sit down here, because I was looking back at the videos and he was sitting, he put his chair so he could sit like that. And he looked up all over the country, he saw all them tapes and stuff. I might have somebody behind the counter serving drinks and stuff. Wait until then to get thirsty and rock. Did he pay double since he paid for last week too? Did he pay for last week? All right. Now this is relationships. These are Emmitt Scott and Spingarn and others talking to each other. Listen very carefully. I think you'll find the weight of the information very glaring. They want to get the Negro editors together to build a consensus for the Negroes to support the white man at a very critical period. Simultaneously, they want to assess the Negroes and see which Negroes they might have trouble with, which Negroes should be stressed for further cooperation, who should be asked for names. They were looking for a society that don't know no names. All these hunkies was hunting names big time. Give me them names. Give me every memo. Give me the names. Give me the names. Von Dumont and the rest. These are all those documents. This is to George Creel, chairman of the Committee on Public Information, which at that time was a government agency. I guess probably something like press secretary or something. What's up, Bob? Dear Mr. Creel, this is from Emmitt Scott. I have been holding a conference today with Major J.E. Spingarn of Military Intelligence Branch of the General Staff. We have been discussing at length the situation with respect to the Negro people of the United States. This is dated June 5th, 1918. Our joint feeling and opinion is that in the present statement, and notice that these are not all spelled the way you may spell them now. Oh, that reminds me. Made me look at your tape on the Khaled lecture. I opened it up today, and you got to look at the word warrior. W-O. Oh, right. Right, okay, all right. All right. I do get my chance to look at them things now. Tonight, Buddy has to give his tape up. He has to give his tape to me. Normally, the cameraman been taking the tapes home. Buddy has to give his tape up tonight because I got from him last week the Georgetown lecture. So I put the thing on today. I'm going to look at it, and it opens up with a naked woman. She got a rifle in her hand. She got bullets strapped between her naked breasts and a holster around her naked waist. And I think Fight the Power by Public Enemy is a song playing in the background and shit. So,
I didn't see that at Georgetown.
I didn't see it. Yeah. I was wondering why Buddy was over in the corner looking at the camera and shit. When the lecture started, you remember we was over there, Buddy was over there looking at the camera and shit all down. So I was telling you guys, you got to give it to me live and uncensored. You can't be adding on. Now, Donald took something out, and he didn't put something on. Yes.
We talked about the bullets strapped around it. Last weekend, which was 10 days ago, the real Black Panthers had their reunion in San Francisco, and I'll try to get some more information and bring it back to you.
Yeah, I have some friends who were there. I like
nobody knows about it. You won't. It's not too. It might have been published in the San Francisco paper about starting one of the Panthers from the East Coast and stuff. So I'll bring some information back one day. I can't tell when I talk to my friend in San Francisco.
Okay. Excuse me.
I'm not negating the new Panthers. I'm just saying the real, so you know whom I'm talking about. The '60s Panthers had a reunion. So.
Our joint feeling and opinion is that in the present state of affairs among the Negro people, it would be exceedingly desirable if this meeting were held in Washington, D.C. at an early date. A meeting at which there might be present from 15 to 20 editors of the most important colored newspapers and magazines, together with probably a dozen other influential leaders among the Negro people. At which conference there would be a full discussion of the situation from the point of view of recognizing the fact that we are at war and that Negro public opinion should be led along helpful lines rather than along lines that make for discontempt and unrest. Major Spingarn and I shall be altogether willing to suggest a list of names and addresses of these men who could be called into such a conference, and it is my earnest opinion that the splendid results that would follow such a meeting in the direction of molding healthful public opinion would amply justify the comparatively small expense that would be involved in providing for the actual and necessary traveling experiences of these men. Hey girl, you better cool it over there. Major Spingarn and I are jointly signing this letter as our recommendation to you. A conference at your convenience with respect to the matter can be held if desired. Thank you in advance for a word of reply. I am sincerely yours, Emmitt J. Scott, Special Assistant to the War Department. Emmitt J. Scott's granddaughter is who?
Elaine Brown, who did run the chapter at, not the chapter, the party, the first woman to ever run the Black Panther Party.
All right.
After a lot of purges and conflicts in the party.
Okay, and then
get a book, Taste of Power,
on page,
Elaine Brown.
On page what? 50. She discusses her relationship with her grandfather, Emmitt Scott, who became the grandsire archon of the Boule by 1941. Emmitt Scott, as I've read in the last couple of days, and sometimes I feel better just telling you the things instead of just reading you exactly from the page that I read it from. But Emmitt Scott was very influential at Howard University. When he came to Howard, his influence was such that he recruited Carter G. Woodson to come to Howard. Carter G. was working in the public school system, and Carter G. broke out against Roscoe Bruce. Carter G. was the principal of a school here, and he felt he was being undermined by another school that was being built. And, right, that Dunbar was being built, and he felt that his technical school was being circumvented by Dunbar. And Roscoe Bruce, who was the assistant superintendent of schools, he felt was failing in separating the missions of the various schools. And Carter G., who was as a principal here in the Washington school system, was very much involved in adult education. He was emphasizing black history. And Carter G. Woodson's style of black history was not bringing up Negroes who had assisted whites. What I was able to pick up on was that there was much early literature written by whites that they fostered blacks who wrote accounts of blacks who assisted whites, that there was no defiant Negro history. Something wrong, sister? Okay. And so Carter G. Was the principal of, and I need to tell you that school, because I guess it's got a new name now. Because I don't think the school, I wouldn't doubt, but if I give you the name, you might be able to tell me if,
I
if this is the same school. Now, he also went down to West Virginia and taught at one of the West Virginia schools. He also taught in the Philippines for some years. Blacks America was occupying the Philippines. So many blacks who wanted to teach had to go to the Philippines to ride the boat to the Philippines to teach there, for the whites were not as willing to allow them to be teaching in the public school system. Remember, the Rosenwald Foundation, the Phelps-Stokes Fund, the Rockefeller Foundation, all of them built the schools down south to allow the development of the Negro teachers who then taught in those schools, who eventually taught into the colleges, who eventually became the leaders. Whitney Young and all the rest of them came out of colleges on into the action arena, as they so to say. And so Carter G was at the school and Washington. He took that job when they were going to lower his salary over in the Philippines. And I think he was making, he accepted a salary of about $2,300 a year. When he got his salary up to $3,000 a year, he thought he had really hit it. One thing I noticed about Carter G was that they say he was a intensive disciplinarian, very excessively strict, had a limited sense of humor. But interestingly enough, that all of the people who I read in the last couple of days about Carter G. Woodson, all of them were excessively impressed with his charismatic teaching ability. His lectures, said he supplemented a lot of his income with his lectures, and that he gave the most fascinating lectures of anybody in his day in terms of captivating the audience about stories about Negro heroes, and his emphasis in beating on educators that did not emphasize Negro things. I was very interested. He was at the, it says from the fall of 1919 until the end of 1917, Woodson remained at the M Street High School, where he taught history, French, Spanish, English. Although technically any student could attend M Street High School, only the most financially secure and academically well-prepared students were admitted. Because of the space constraints and perhaps because students had to buy their own books, most of the students came from Washington's growing black bourgeoisie, and the school was more like an elite black preparatory school than a public high school. More M Street High School students went to attend college than did graduate from any other high school in the city, black or white. A gifted and dedicated teacher, Woodson inspired many students to study Negro history. Rayford W. Logan, who was a student at M Street High School when Woodson taught there, went on to earn his PhD from Harvard. Now, Rayford Logan was taught by Carter G. At M Street High School, and of course it's Rayford Logan who is the co-author of the Encyclopedia on American Negroes. Now, the point that I've come to learn, a great appreciation of what was going on during this period with these writers, were that at that time, one of Carter G. Woodson's greatest fantasies was to have the Encyclopedia on Africa. And whites would never fund it. He never had it. It still ain't been one, I don't know. But he never had it because whites wouldn't fund it. But that these Negroes were coming up with the first time ever journals on Negroes, that blacks didn't seem to have a lot of information on other blacks. So the person who became the one to compile the information was of value to everyone else because they had had the chance to get to these books. Books appeared to be very privileged at that time, and access to books, access to collections and other things appeared to be products of great inner rivalry between people. Jabari, quickly.
Well, there is the Encyclopedia on African history. I think Diop has one, and somebody else has one, but they at the white colleges, though. And at a Chicago, my friend had a intern at Chicago University. He said he saw all that up there, Chicago.
The University of Chicago got a bunch of black stuff they done stole. And now the other part of this is, once I go through the black elite, Carter G., Alain Locke, and all of those, and look at their interactions with the rich whites, then I've got to go over to Diop. I've got to go over to J.A.Rogers. I've got to go over to James and look at the pressure and the tensions put on them as another group of more nationalistic writers who also wrote, who didn't have the engagements with whites, or seemingly on the surface we don't think that they did. I state that because when we look, you're going to be shocked to see how whites strategically funded damn near all study. No study was done for just knowledge. Study was done for hire. And without the money, study wasn't done. People dropped great studies. That's why when Carter G began to initiate things that whites wouldn't fund, he broke the line. He broke the line that said a nigga don't do nothing unless a white man say okay. Remember now, Rosa Parks again ain't till 57. So you got 5. Started in 55, over in 57.
She boycott, what she did in 55.
How long was the boycott? 463 days.
About 20 months.
Damn near 55. Let's say 57 when it finished. All right.
Started December 1st, 1955.
That's right.
All right now. You know, you look a little like Rosa Parks.
That's right.
She got on the bus.
Thank
She
you.
get that review from Greg. He was on the bus. Roland rode the bus. That's right. That's right. I see that. I see her in you. So anyway, we can see another thing too is the impact. We sat around and talked about the number of people who are on internet, talking about the Boule and other things that we've talked about over the course of time, and in all of the various cities, the people who have focused on information because we were able to lay a thread. What I'm most intrigued by is the number of students that Carter G. Woodson produced, people in the spirit of Carter G. One of his first research associates he ever hired was Charles Wesley, who went on to write the Alpha history book, and the Boule history book, and the Elks history book, and the Life and Times of Prince Hall. And you could understand why certain small cadres of scholars became only those scholars who wrote only the cornerstone information. That as they began to develop curriculum, the fight for curriculum, Carter G. and even Alain Locke asked for a curriculum in African studies in 1921. The curriculum in African studies didn't get to Howard till 1959. But they asked for it 50 years before they got it, stating that if Howard could be the center of knowledge on the Negro, they would be of use to every white in the world who would have to come to Howard to get the knowledge of the Negro. And that was excessively important, how people strategized around their schools. They kept trying to get Carter G. Woodson to take his research and put it under Howard or put it under Tuskegee. He refused the institutional influence, stating that even though he could appreciate the leaders of them institutions, he wasn't accepting the indirect pressure of their donors. And that was excessively intriguing. So I don't know what the M Street School is now, but it says the Dunbar story. You could read about the M Street School and the Dunbar story. Let's see, Woodson taught several different schools. Initially, he was assigned to Thaddeus Stevens School. Is that still around, Thaddeus Stevens?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay, but when he first taught there, he taught 8th grade there, but only after a month he was transferred to Armstrong Manual Training High School, where he remained until October of 1911. He was transferred to the M Street School in 1911, and there he stayed till 1917. His salary was $1,200. Anyway, very interesting. We'll get back to that. Now, let's go back to the meeting of Negroes who are going to build a consensus for the New World Order's needs for World War I. Remember, the New World Order needs World War I. They need World War I. They need World War II. They need Korea. They need Vietnam. They need these things. And to get Negro assistance in accomplishing these things without disruption. Now remember, when the black soldiers came back from the World War I, there were great race riots all over America. They didn't happen until then. When one race riot started when the white men saw black men wearing the military uniform in public. They didn't want the nigger to wear a soldier's outfit in the public. The black business business district in Tulsa, Oklahoma, builds up so much resentment against poor honkies in Oklahoma, they got to bomb it. You know, but the race riots of 1919 and beyond, especially Chicago, were the first time Negroes went away and got their guns in the North and went and hunted down the whites like the whites had hunted down the blacks only earlier in the day. Good. As whites hunted by day, the Negroes hunted by night. Huh? Oh, they had a big race riot in Chicago, 1919. Yeah, as many whites died as many blacks. Let's give a hand for equality. And in that climate, I want to skip over to another book. This was one of Tiome's books when she was going to Howard. I forget what class this was, Afro-American History.
That was the class.
That was the class, Afro-American History? Well, I'm intrigued in what these books are. I'd like to see some of your books. Huh? You don't have any books? Okay. But I'd like to see some of the curriculum that they're putting out. I told you, huh?
In which class?
In certain classes.
Oh, because I have some of my books.
Okay, well, good. I'll tell you after lecture what kind of things I'm interested in. But remember, during this period between 1910 and 1920, you had the Great Migration from the southern cities up to the north. And what I wanted to, as you look through all of this climate, remember Jekyll Island. Between 1910 and 1920, you're on Jekyll Island. You got the great foundations coming forth. You got the AMA coming forth. You got World War I. You got all of the FBI Hoovers coming on. You got Garvey coming on. You were around then, weren't you? Says, and many of those are already at work marched off to war, leaving empty factory jobs in northern cities. Between the years 1910 and 1920, the black population in Gary, Indiana, increased by 1,283.6%. In Detroit, the population increased by 611%. In Cleveland, the black population, increased by 308%. In Chicago, it increased by 148.2%. It was not only the pull of industry that drew blacks from the South during this period. Southern agriculture was undergoing severe difficulties as the boll weevil moved up from Mexico, ravaged cotton crop after cotton crop. The tenant farmers and sharecropper systems were driving rural blacks deeper and deeper into despair when a black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, written by Robert Abbott, who was one of the Negroes at the meeting with the government that I'm going to read you into right now, just to let you hook all of these circumstances in together into a dynamic. We must pick up all of these divergent patterns on a dynamic. That the tenant farmer sharecropper systems were driven rural blacks deeper and deeper in despair. When black newspaper Chicago Defender began to encourage blacks to migrate northward and northern industry began to send labor recruiters to the South, the response was overwhelming. And interestingly enough, it says that when the labor recruiters went down there to get the blacks, the white boy in the South said originally he was encouraging the Negroes to go. When he looked up and saw the Negroes leaving the farms in mass, he started setting up tariffs saying that a man who came down to be a labor agent for a northern factory had to get a license of $5,000 to recruit Negroes to go north. So they didn't want the white man to come down there and raid their Negro population. Now, one of the things, speaking of Negroes, I'm sure y'all saw the Negro Carl Rowan having to respond in the public to being called a nigger by Lyndon Johnson as he selected him to be a nigger in the cabinet, and he had to call the hunky senator who said, you know I can't support a nigger for no job. He said, well, I know you can't support a nigger, but don't denut him. I seen you denut niggas in the Congress or Senate or whatever he was doing. So they asked Carl Rowan on the little show on Saturday, newsmakers or some shit. They asked him on news everywhere. Well, Carl, what? He said, well, Johnson told me to go to the something hotel and to sit my ass down, the Mayflower Hotel, the Madison Hotel, and sit my ass down and don't be seen by nobody, don't say shit until he had everything But Johnson called him a nigger. Yeah, use the word nigger. Then you heard Johnson tell another senator, well, my wife, Lady Bird, could speak there in Georgia for you, I'm sure, but I can't let her speak at no audiences that ain't integrated. If you had just one nigger, even a little light-skinned black woman, just one light-skinned black woman who could sit in the first row. My wife told me that if you could get one nigger to be in that audience, there was no place she'd rather be in all of the country than to be speaking there with you in Georgia. That's some shit, right? Tell me how committed Johnson was.
And when Gordon Peterson is on Channel 9, Inside Washington show Saturday at 7 o'clock.
Right, that's the one he asked him.
When they came back, he had mentioned we're going to have something when we come back on Carl Rowan. And they went to commercial. When they went to it, and it went on for a little while and stuff, and he had all the words up there and stuff. When they came back, all it did was a little laugh, he chuckled and stuff, and they went to commercial. No words were said about that.
Not the first
They didn't say nothing. They smiled. Grin, as they used to say it down south.
But the process by which and the key thing he said about Carl Rowan, remember in last week's tape, one of the things you would want to get in last week's tape, remember Carl Rowan has to come out on Malcolm X. He said the worst thing that could happen is that black people could think around the world that somehow Malcolm X's death is of any significance. Malcolm X was irrelevant, had no followers, and he made a point about how he sent his zealot supporters in the U.S. Information Agency out into the public to send the word around the world that Malcolm X was of no consequence, and don't get all wound up and tense about his death because he wasn't nobody to nobody. And that's in last week's tape about Malcolm's international moves, out of the Judas factor, and the Rowan's insistence on de-emphasizing Malcolm's importance. And of course, one of the key things Johnson told the hunky senator was, he said, now look, I took him on some of my travels with me, and the nigger will do what I tell him. He's a nigger that'll follow instructions. He's a nigger, do what I say. Some shit he said like that. Right, good nigger.
NYOB.
But that relationship, you needed a good white man to vouch for a good nigger, has been the only way those niggas made it. You couldn't make it without that level of sponsorship. So the bond or bind to your hunky, even in spite of his record, in spite of his ideological focus, in spite of who he may have been on assassinating or whatever, was irrelevant to the fact that he was the one that helped you. And that was excessively of importance. So you had these great migration, you had the emphasis coming up. When the war ended and the soldiers returned to find their jobs taken over by blacks, the inevitable racial classes occurred. Whites anxious to reaffirm the old caste lines, acting in ways intended to negate the economic and psychological gains made by blacks during the war, but the newly settled black laborers and many of the black men returning from military service in Europe were in no mood to be pushed around. Sporadic violence broke out throughout the nation. Several black men were lynched in uniform of the United States Army, one simply because he wore the uniform. In 1918 in Chicago, the homes of many blacks who had brought property on the edges of white neighborhoods were burned. All this served as a prelude to the summer of 1919, which would be like the summer of 1999 in America, where there were 22 race riots in the United States in both North and South of America. Oh, does it sound like the riots of 65 without assassinations?
22.
The riots of 1919 were precipitated by those returning from the war of the class over jobs. In much of the early literature, I'm also finding a lot the use of the word caste, C-A-S-T-E, to describe a segment of Negroes. The caste word is used, The American Dilemma by Maida Gunther, all of these books use that word caste. Du Bois and all of them got heavily into the word caste. So anyway, I want to just add that focus into this period. Negro subversion, memo. Okay, we're 1 hour down. We're in good shape. We're 8:45. I know most of you all are sleepy and tired. And I know you want to go home and stuff. And just stick with me a little while longer, just a few more minutes here, while we send this tape out that I think will help folks in some other places as well. Memorandum for Colonel Churchill, June 10th, 1918. Last memo we read was Emmitt Scott setting up the memo setting up the meeting with Spingarn to Churchill. Then now this is Churchill. This is a memo for Churchill dated June 10th, 1918. Subject, Negro subversion. I reported for duty at the Military Intelligence Bureau on May 27th and was assigned to work on 1, the Bolshevik, L.W.W. etc., and 2, Negro subversion. I immediately formulated the following program for work in Negro subversion. This is Mr. Spingarn. This is the man for whom the medal was named after. This is the man who the NAACP still holds as his highest person. This is the name across the Howard Library. But his biggest tool in use for whites was his containment and control of blacks. Intelligence. Under the section entitled Intelligence, A. I immediately formulated the following program for work in Negro subversion. A. Organization throughout country to count... A. Organization throughout country to counter espionage system among colored people themselves. B. Now notice, we don't know what this is, but listen what he said he set up. Organization throughout the country to counter espionage system among colored people themselves. Organization throughout country of counter espionage system among colored people themselves. B. Conference of 30 or 40 colored editors and race leaders in Washington. C. Letters to editors of 200 colored and colored papers and others following the conference. D. Increase and organizational, again, this is not written logically, I'm just going to read you as they wrote it. Increase and organization of colored intelligence officers throughout the U.S. E. Cooperation with Mr. Emmitt Scott, Special Assistant to the Secretary of War. In Section 2, counter-propaganda to offset chief causes of colored disaffection. A. Encourage passage of anti-lynching legislation in Congress. B. Address or proclamation by President indicating that during the year lynching will be regarded as disloyal and aiding the enemy since it causes disaffection among 12 million people. C. Denial by general purging of false reports of treatment of colored troops abroad. D. Assignment of Colonel Charles Young, USA, retired to active service. Now this guy, Colonel Charles Young, truly intrigues me, for he, as a military man, is the one who wrote the memo that eventually bumped Du Bois back out, saying that they ain't gonna listen to Du Bois after he wrote the Close the Ranks editorial, but he did a lot of things, and his profile of Charles Young, and he did a lot of things for military intelligence that were truly quite frightening. And his role as a military man being sent all over the world, and the reason he's asking for him to be reinstated is that the whites saw that he was going to be the first black general or something. So they ruled him military unfit for service.
High blood.
So he rode a horse, high blood pressure, so he rode a horse from Ohio to Washington on horseback to prove to the hunkies he was a fit nigga. So because of that, Spingarn is in here asking for him to be reinstated. And eventually he ends up getting reinstated, I think, send the Philippines or some shit like that. How you know about that?
I read it. It's in one of Marcus Garvey's books.
Talking about Young, right. I know you know a lot of Negro history. And in fact, be ready for the Robert Bruce stuff because we're going to lead up on that. We'll get into that too. Anyway, so that's interesting. Colonel Young, remember him. E, stimulating counter-propaganda in the press through the Committee on Public Propaganda. F, discouraging vicious anti-Negro utterances in the white press. A conference of colored editors and other colored leaders will be held in Washington June 19th to June 21st. Now this is June 10th. Juneteenth, right. Something actual and necessary expenses will be paid by the Committee on Public Information. See attached copy, etc. Okay? Lieutenant T. Gregory, 349th FA, has applied for something, I can't read, it's a little faded. Intelligence officers will shortly be selected. A bill drafted by Captain Hornblower, at my suggestion, see enclosed copy, was submitted to Representative Dyer at the request of the Judicial Committee. Captain Hornblower and myself appeared before it on June 6th and explained the necessity of such legislation as anti-lynching. Various suggestions have become made to Mr. Scott, which he has agreed to carry out. For example, that a page of plate matter be furnished weekly to the colored press. Plate matter, I guess that must be information spools. Cablegrams sent to some in regard to treatment of colored troops. Interview with Dr. Du Bois, editor-in-chief of the colored magazine, The Crisis, circulation monthly 70,000, who has promised A, to submit all matters in his magazine to designated persons in advance of publication, to make his paper an organ of patriotic propaganda hereafter. Work begun on organization of counter-espionage committee of colored people, advisory committee to the chief of staff of the Army. The following recommendations are made. 1, that Negro subversion in all its forms be assigned to a separate and distinct section of military intelligence. 2, that the Secretary of War recommend the immediate passage of anti-lynching legislation. 3, see, they were having a hard time getting niggas to do shit if they couldn't kill lynching. Now, you know when the anti-lynching bill was passed? 1959.
Damn.
1959. And the reason I know is that the head of the NAACP in Chicago, a man named Abner, was overthrown. He was kicked out of the NAACP for supporting the anti-lynching legislation that was going on in Congress. And Mayor Daley, who had won the election in '55, his main man was Congressman Dawson, and he told Dawson not to support the anti-lynching bill, and Dawson didn't. He was the big black congressman of Chicago. So Abner then rallied the NAACP against Dawson, so Dawson took the regular Democratic machine and bought up memberships and overthrew Abner. Just won the election. Used the Democratic Party and bought up the memberships and overthrew the man who was forcing him to support anti-lynching. One of the staunch supporters of defeating the anti-lynching legislation was John D. Rockefeller, who was out in the forefront of defeating the anti-lynching legislation. Just for the record. The following recommendations were that the restoration of Colonel Young to active service be given immediate consideration. After all, the nigga rode all the way here on the horse. Oh boy. That the creation of an advisory committee to the Chief of Staff of the Army be effectively authorized. And 5, that the advisability on military grounds of an address or proclamation by the President to be called to the attention of the Secretary of War. Signed, Joel E. Spingarn, Major, Military Intelligence. Next memo, dated June 19th, from the War Department, from John Gillespie. Attention of Major J.E. Spingarn. Gentlemen, pursuant to your request of the 3rd for a list of the officers of this association. This is now, they're about to give up the list to all the names of the NAACP. Remember we heard about that in the Memphis Commercial Appeal story? Well, this is the actual memo in which they gave it up. June 19th, 1918. This from the Secretary of the NAACP to Spingarn. War Department Military Intelligence, 15th and M Streets, Washington, D.C., 15th and M is where it was located. Pursuant to your request of the 3rd for a list of the officers of this association, including the officers of the branches throughout the United States, we are enclosing here with such a list. The names of the national officers appear on the stationery upon which this letter is written. On separate sheets, we have given you the cities in which branches of the association are located and the names and addresses of the president and secretary of each branch. I beg to advise you that at the present time, The association has a list of 117 active branches. 35 of these are new branches organized within the present year. The others are of long standing. The total membership of all the branches to date, in excess of 32,000 paid members, and probably when reports of our membership drive just closed are in, will amount to a minimum of 35,000 names, with the possibility of several thousand more. The following branches listed have been inactive for some time: Alton, Illinois; Cairo, Illinois; Carbondale, Indiana; Galesburg, Illinois; Jacksonville, Illinois; Mounds, Illinois; and St. Joseph, Missouri. Very, very truly yours, John Gillady, Secretary NAACP. Memorandum from Major General J.E. Chamberlain, dated June 19, 1918, from M. Churchill, Colonel, General Staff, Chief Military Intelligence Branch, Executive Division. Memorandum: during your visit to this office a week before last, Major Spingarn mentions General Boule's Bulletin number 35 and the effect it had on the colored people. I am enclosing herewith a clipping which deals with this subject from a colored paper called The Crisis, which may be of interest to you. Referring to the general question of unrest amongst colored people, you will be interested to know that Major Spingarn has made considerable progress in his efforts to influence colored public opinion and is in close touch with Mr. Scott, Assistant to the Secretary of War. We have obtained additional personnel for his subsection and feel we have sufficient information to handle this situation. So they give him a copy of Du Bois's Crisis as an example of moderated Negro public opinion. June 22nd, 1918, from Chief Military Intelligence Branch, Executive Division 2, Intelligence Officer, Fort of Excavation, Hologram, New Jersey. Something I can't read, it's kind of double shot. Subject: returned Negro soldiers. It is our intentions to ask for the Negro soldiers invalid, something cut off, home, to address colored audiences in regards to the treatment of colored troops abroad in order to stimulate the morale of men and to set at rest disturbing rumors circulated by German agents. On the arrival of transports from abroad, the names of Negro soldiers, especially those wounded or sick, who are, in your opinion, may be qualified to deliver simple addresses of this sort, would be submitted to us regularly. I didn't quite get that one. Memorandum to Colonel Churchill, Report, Conference of Colored Editors, June 22nd, 1918. 1. Constant complaints from intelligence officers and others have reached us to the effect that the colored press was spreading disaffection among Negroes. In order that the bitter tone of these newspapers might be modified with a consequent stimulation of Negro morals, I suggest to Mr. Emmitt Scott, Special Assistant of Secretary of War, that a conference of colored editors and other free leaders be arranged in Washington. Mr. Scott dictated a letter to the Committee on Public Information, which I signed jointly with him, asking Mr. Creel to pay the expenses for such a conference. Upon receiving Mr. Creel's acceptance of our proposal, Mr. Scott and I agreed on a list of conferees and on a general plan for the conference. And confidential telegrams were sent in Mr. Scott's name to about 40 editors and other leaders of the colored race. I received the written permission of the Secretary of War to take part in the conference. 2, the conference was held in the Interior Building on 18th and F Streets. What's there now on 18th and F?
Department Interior, where I was laid off.
Department Interior, where you was laid off? I'll show you that. The editors of 31 Negro papers were present, covering every part of the country except the far west, including Kansas City, St. Louis, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Chicago, Baltimore, Cleveland, Louisville, Nashville, and Atlanta. So he said they got the key Negroes. In addition, there were some 15 of the most representative leaders of the colored race, including such men as Dr. Robert Moulton, Booker T. Washington's successor at Tuskegee Institute. And again, you don't kill a man until you got his replacement. Moulton replaced Booker T, and Booker T died mysteriously.
They got beaten to death.
Got beaten to death. Say he was peeping at a white woman. We know that wasn't true. Charles W. Anderson, ex-collector of Internal Revenue in New York. Professor Cook of Howard University. Archibald H. Grimke, ex-counselor of Santo Domingo. Boule, of course. And other men of influence of their race. The session lasted from 10:30 to 3 o'clock daily, with Mr. Scott presiding. The Secretary of War and Mr. Creel addressed the conference on the first day, Mr. Hurley of the Shipping Board, and Mr. Craig representing the Food Administration on the second day. Assistant Secretary of the Navy Roosevelt, eventually President, and General Verge now, Major E. Reckham, and Major P.D.M. de Montel of the French Army on the third day. The accounts of these French officers of the treatment accorded to African troops in France made a very deep impression on the conference, and perhaps no other incident created so much enthusiasm. The general plan, which Mr. Scott and I had in mind, involved general discussion on the part of all the conferees so as to permit each man to, quote, let off steam as much as he desired, and then to guide the discussion in the right direction so that unanimous action might be possible before the conference is closed. Like somebody got a gray Honda on the side?
Yeah. Hyundai?
Hyundai, yeah, your lights are on. Bro. Thank you, sir. The general plan, let off steam as much as desired and then guide the discussion in the right direction so that unanimous action might be possible before the conference closed. It was decided that the conference should be private and that all public accounts of it should be emulated from Mr. Scott. The conference were given to understand that they have been called to Washington to assist the government in winning the war, and more especially to furnish advice on how the morals of the colored people might be made more effective for this purpose. Heated argument was not infrequent, but on the whole, the tone of the discussion was sober and statesmanlike, and the conference conformed throughout to our original plan. Every phase of the Negro problem was discussed, and several practical movements were inaugurated, including the formulation of a committee of editors to spread information regarding public health problems, especially venereal diseases, never mind we were injecting them in Tuskegee, among colored soldiers and civilians. And remember, the first Army Veterans Hospital was built at Tuskegee. And I denoted that one of the things some of the elder blacks give Moulton honor for is not allowing the Ku Klux Klan in 1923 to force Tuskegee to hire all white doctors in the institute. And of course the Klan knew that they had to do these injections of syphilis. And the Klan just did not believe at that time that a black man could be trusted to do what a black man eventually did. You understand that? Yes. So once they got the assurances that the blacks would fuck the other blacks, the Klan backed down, and Moulton was allowed to go ahead and staff the hospital with black doctors. Of course, they sitting in the meeting with Moulton talking about they going to release information on finding venereal diseases. Yeah. Yeah. Every phase of the Negro problem was discussed among colored soldiers and civilians. This was initiated by Captain Arthur Spingarn, representing the Surgeon General's office. You remember Joel Spingarn was the chairman of the NAACP, and his brother Arthur was the chief attorney and the treasurer of the NAACP. So they made Joel Spingarn military intelligence general. They made Arthur captain. They tried to make Du Bois lieutenant. And he was made lieutenant, even passed his physical when he failed it. And then eventually he wrote the editorial, which I'm going to read for you, on behalf of the white people to trick blacks into the war, and eventually was then ruled ineffective by the reinstated Colonel Young, who busted his ass back out. Listen to this. The conferees were unanimous in believing that great unrest prevailing among colored people in this country. Dr. Moulton told the Secretary of War that he had just returned from a trip through 5 or 6 southern states, and that he had never known as much unrest among his people. He believed that it was caused chiefly by lynching, and that unless lynching was stopped, the leaders of the race could hardly persuade their people to give wholehearted support to the war. This is a part of a series of Negro one-issue demands of whites. White man, if you do this one thing for us, we'll do them 50 things for you. No, this has gone on for 50 years now. These Negroes have come one-dimensionally to whites. Still doing it. He appealed to the secretary to make lynching a federal offense and said that editorials, now, they promised the niggas they would do this, right? They promised them. What year did they do it in? 59. 40 years after they promised they would do it. 40 years after they promised these Negroes, if you just get us through the war, we're going to stop lynching for you. They didn't stop shit. Still lynching. High-tech lynchings. That's what Clarence said. Clarence needed, now I thought about Clarence needed one of the old-fashioned lynchings. That's what we missed. Yeah, I saw some water around here. Oh, there's some water on this side. Yeah. Sister, could you put it down there? Did they come pick up some money earlier? I was going to say, because I know we sold more than 3. Yeah, my single. Anyway, I get one. No, yeah. No, anyway, I got 5 here. I don't see enough up there. I get it. You can see how the Negro thing is being set up. Now, to get Negroes to agree to do this, remember, this is now 1900s. To get Negroes to agree to do this, you got to know Negroes are willing to be called in, to be confidential, to uphold the principles of private discussion, and then to go out and do what they're told to do. Says that they was begging to get lynching stopped. Said that editors in the Atlanta Constitution and other Southern papers indicated that there was a growing sentiment in favor of such action on the part of the best elements of the white South. He told me privately that some colored bishops who had said to him after the last lynching that they no longer cared who won the war, It was suggested by several conferees that these lynchings might be incited by German agents. Interestingly enough, Sister and I saw that movie, what's the movie with Gene Hackman? The Chamber. And interestingly enough, the movie is about building sentiment for a Ku Klux Klan bomber murderer. He shoots the black man, and they didn't have no problem with that. He bombed 2 Jewish children, is what they was busting on him for. But the movie was about building sympathy for him, and you're cheering for him as he's getting executed, and you feel hurt as he goes down. They make a human side to a bomber. And the attorney who tried to defend him, his grandson says, his daddy was a Klan. His granddaddy was a Klan. How is he going to be a white man and in good standing in this community unless he killed niggas like a good white man does? How is he going to be a sister? He's a victim of the circumstances of what it took to be a good white man. And you should not hold him responsible for that. It's a heavy flick. That means lynching gonna be coming back.
They said someone homes up in New York, someone died in jail, homes up in New York.
Yeah, oh yeah, they be doing it all the time. All agree, however, that the continuance of lynching was producing a dangerous feeling among colored people of the country. Other grievances were mentioned with bitterness, for example, the refusal of the Red Cross to employ colored nurses for colored soldiers, the refusal of the government bureaus to employ colored stenographers who had passed the civil service examination, the discrimination against Negroes in travel, the treatment of Colonel Young, nigga who rode here on a horse. But the unwillingness or inability of the federal government to protect colored people against lynching seemed to be the paramount grievance. Again, that wasn't resolved for 40 years. The conference ultimately passed resolutions submitted by the Committee of Seven, the G7, but actually written by Dr. Du Bois to the following effect: that the conferees were intensely loyal and had no desires to press for the righting of all their wrongs while the country was in the throngs of World War. I'm going to repeat that. That the conferees were intensely loyal and had no desire to press for the righting of all their wrongs while the country was in the threat of World War. But that some grievances like lynching called for immediate relief in 40 years in order that the leaders of the colored race might carry their people with them and put an end to the bitterness and unrest that was undermining colored morals. In addition to these resolutions, which were to be forwarded through Mr. Creel to the President, a list of grievances calling for immediate remedy was prepared for submission to the bureau heads in Washington. A copy of the resolution and list of grievances will be furnished later. The conferees, in my opinion, will have an excellent effect on the colored press and the other leaders of the Negro race. All were pleased at having been taken into confidence of the government and asked for advice and cooperation. The list of grievances, and it's the same today. When I was on the board in NAACP, the biggest thing was when Ben Hooks would go and have his 15 minutes with the president and have his picture taken in the White House. Then they would mail that picture to all of the branches and ask you to go out and raise money. And the phrase was, give the NAACP money, you can see our man has got the ear of the White House. So when Reagan came, when Ronald Reagan became president, he refused to have that ceremonial picture taking with the Negro leaders. So George Bush held that meeting with the Negro leaders. And that's when he made President Cheeks head of the United Negro College and shit and all of that stuff, and special assistant to the president for historically black colleges. Yes, Brother Jabari.
This is a Jesse question. Did Jesse ever have somebody that he was grooming to like take over where he's ever going to end that or something?
Everybody just gave you an answer, brother.
Other than his son.
Brother, Farrakhan, Elijah Muhammad, Jesse Jackson, none of them see beyond their own families. Period. Never have and never will. That's just the way it is. Right, Bruce? Right, Bruce? Now,
you know if anybody here ever got scholarships under the United Negro College Fund?
ask.
I mean, I'm just wondering, curious, if anybody knows of people who've gotten scholarships at United Negro College Fund.
Where's the money at?
I know one guy who's on a commercial with his grandfather up in the top. You see him on the TV. He got a
Only
soul.
one?
Okay, now.
Take it over, Canadians.
Now, listen.
Never saw it transpire. It's a lot of fun.
I told him to take it over.
I don't know what.
Now let me read you the names of who was at the conference.
Go ahead.
Conference of Colored Editors, Washington, D.C., June 19th to the 21st, 1918. Particulars to be submitted privately to the bureau heads in Washington. These are the list of grievances. National legislation on lynching colored Red Cross nurses. Remember, because Marcus Garvey put his nurses out in the street. And that was scaring the shit out of them. Garvey dressed them up, gave them uniforms, made them soldiers and everything. So they said, look, white man, he got an army. That shit is going on. Colored Red Cross nurses, colored able seamen, colored volunteer soldiers to the extent of their volunteering, colored physicians for colored troops, training of larger number of colored officers, unlimited promotion of colored officers according to proven efficiency, utilizing the services of Colonel Charles Young, retired. You can see they love them some Colonel Young.
Hell of a ride, though.
So the man died of prostate cancer. Right. So he had the permanent Boule. He thought the group's name was Boule. Unwilling, utilizing the services of Colonel Charles Young. You guys are awful. An attempt to equalize among black and white troops the proportion of draftees assigned to stevedore regiments. What's a stevedore regiment?
It's a shipyard. It's people load ships are called stevedores.
He said shipyard, he said horses. Shipyard?
That's people that unload the ship on the dock.
Okay. Draftees assigned to stevedore regiments, service battalions, etc. Systematic getting and dissemination of news of Negro troops at home and abroad. Systematic attempt to correct ridiculous and misrepresentation of Negro and omissions of his achievement in the white press. Consideration of a government loan to the Negro Republic of Liberia, newly actively aligned with the Allies. Excuse me. And of course, they gave Liberia how many million, Bruce? White finance, Negro leadership versus Garvey? 5. I know you. That's what you meant to say. 5. Right. You're good, man. You're good.
I'm not good. You good.
You outstanding, bro.
Be outstanding in this few minutes.
Excuse me, Captain. You rough him up, Sergeant.
Back to rest.
Sergeant, would you rough him up? I want the sergeant on you. Sergeant. Consideration of government loan to Negro Republic of Liberia, now actively aligned with the Allies. Where did Marcus Garvey want to make his world headquarters? Liberia. So they gave the man $5 million to keep, and Moe said this money will keep Garvey off the shores of Liberia. And interesting enough, Garvey lived and died, never once set foot in Africa. Yep. Never made it to Africa. Right, all of that was going on right then, right. From the early 1900s, 1910, 1919, 20, 21, 22, 23, right in there. Yep. Executive clemency for Negro soldiers recently tried and sentenced at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Remember they had that big incident with all those soldiers, Fort Sam Houston, Texas? I think they came home, what was it? It was a big incident with all these soldiers. It says executive clemency for the Negro soldiers recently tried and sentenced at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. There was a riot or something. They arrested all the blacks or something like that.
I think it was 100 lynching.
Yeah, exactly.
The soldiers bust loose. Soldiers start shooting like that.
Yeah, let's give the soldiers a hand. Subject memorandum for the Chief of Staff, Conference of Colored Editors in Washington. Herewith are the addressees of the Committee on Public Information adopted from the Conference on Colored Editors. June 21st, 1918. Bill of Particulars adopted by the conference. Submission to the bureau heads in Washington. List of conferees at the conference. Spingarn, Conference of Color Editors was called by Emmitt Scott, Special Assistant to War. Committee on Public Information suggesting a military intelligence grant for the purpose of stimulating Negro morals throughout the country by a modification of the bitter tone of the colored press. B, obtaining information in regards to the Negro situation and means of improving it. The conference was held in Washington, June 19th to 21st, 1918. It was attended by 31 editors of colored newspapers and 10 other representative leaders of the colored race. The proceedings of this conference confirmed the existence of widespread unrest among colored people. This unrest may be due to the interposition of German agents in isolated cases, but in the real causes are more fundamental. Now notice the niggas talked all that time about all their grievances. This is the memo now on the meeting, and nowhere did they mention the niggas' grievances. They said the nigga unrest is due to German propaganda. See what they did? They ventilated all them niggas, took all that information on them, put a whole list of particulars in here, and then summed it up with this unrest may be due to the interposition of German agents in isolated cases, but the real causes are more fundamental. For more than 10 years, educated Negroes have been divided between two schools of thought. One represented by Booker T. Washington, emphasizing the Negro's need of industrial training and economic power, and the other presented by W.B. Du Bois, emphasizing the direct demand for civil and political rights. Since the death of Dr. Washington and the racial ferments due to European war, a reaction against Dr. Washington's more conciliatory attitudes has set in and been diffused throughout the colored world. This would have taken place even if we had not declared war against Germany. It was due to a consciousness of their inferior status on the part of the large masses of Negroes for the first time in American history. I don't know what the fuck he just said. I think he said part of the Negro problem stems from his inferior nature. I don't know what the fuck he just said. I'm going to repeat this. I don't know. This would have taken place even if we had not declared war against Germany. It is due to a consciousness on their inferior status on the part of the large masses of Negroes for the first time in American history. The address adopted by the conference makes clear that the leaders of the race are intensely loyal, but feel keenly in their inability to carry out great mass of their race with them in active support of the war unless certain grievances receive immediate attention. The most important of these is lynching, but 13 other grievances are listed in the Bill of Particulars adopted by the conference. Immediate attention to these 14 complaints would stimulate Negro morals to an extraordinary degree. Signed, Churchill, Colonel, General Staff, Chief Military Intelligence Division, Executive Division, noted by Secretary of War file in March. This is dated July 12, 1918. List of conferees. Robert M. Jones, editor, Southwestern Christian Advocate, New Orleans. John H. Murphy, editor, African American, Baltimore. W.T. Andrews, editor, Daily Herald, Baltimore. Charles Strike. Chris J. Perry, editor, Tribune, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. John Mitchell, editor of The Planet, Richmond, Virginia. The Daily Planet. Charles W. Anderson, former Collector Internal Revenue for the 2nd District of New York City, now Assistant Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of New York, at present serving on Exemption Board, New York City. Robert L. Vann, editor of the Courier and Assistant City Solicitor, Pittsburgh. And of course I have the autobiography of Robert Vann, who was brought up on charges at the Boule by W.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson, but when the charges were to be heard, they didn't show up. Vann ended up breaking away from this meeting and not assisting the war effort, and so the Boule felt he was a traitor to his private meeting, and they tried to bring charges against Vann but didn't show up. Let's see, Robert S. Abbott, editor, Chicago Defender, Chicago, Illinois. George L. Knott, proprietor and publisher of the Freedman, Indianapolis, Indiana. A.E. Manning, editor of The World, Indianapolis, Indiana. John D. Howard, editor, The Ledger, Indianapolis, Indiana. Dr. H.M. Minton. Henry Minton, the grandsire archon of Sigma Pi Phi, was one of those 10 other leaders who were there, who were intensely loyal, only had a slight grievance, lynching, who were going to modify the opinion of colored peoples.
His daddy said that, Minton's father said that how to deal with the race problem is primarily that black men marry white women. If we eliminate the black race, we eliminate the race problem.
But actually, the only problem would be that would eliminate the white race. But then again, I'm sure, Sister Nia, we don't have that kind of appetite, do we?
No.
Do we? That's why you saying no. Why are you making noise? Saying oh. I wasn't saying anything about her.
I said no.
No, okay, I thought you said, oh. Hard shit. I was quick, Robert, I was quick. Okay, so y'all know this guy Minton, right? Y'all heard of him?
Yes.
He wanted to set up a group that was like what? Skull and Bones at Yale. Let's see here. Listed, his address is listed at 1130 South 18th Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Reverend Ernest Lyon, Chairman, Colored Branch of Maryland Council of Defense and Counselor General of the Republic of Liberia, United States, Baltimore, Maryland. C.M. Bush, Publisher, Mosaic Guide, Little Rock, Arkansas. Ralph W. Tyler, former Auditor of the Navy Department, contributing editor to Cleveland Advocate. W.E. King, editor of The Age, New York City. George W. Harris, editor of The News, New York City. Richard Warren, editor, Amsterdam News, New York City. P.B. Young, editor, Lodge Journal and Guide, Norfolk, Virginia. W.B. Du Bois, editor, The Crisis. Fred R. Moore, editor, New York Age, New York City. H.C. Smith, editor of The Gazette, Cleveland, Ohio. J.E. Mitchell, editor, The Argus, St. Louis, Missouri. C.K. Robinson, editor, The Clarion, St. Louis. Nelson C. Crove, editor, The Sun, Kansas City, Missouri. Benjamin J. Davis, editor, The Independent, Atlanta, Georgia. J. Finley Wilson, the editor, The Eagle, Washington, D.C. William H. Stewart, editor, American Baptist, Louisville, Kentucky. Robert Moulton, principal, Tuskegee Institute. Major Allen Washington, president, Virginia Organization Society, and representing the Southern Workman Hampton Institute. Henry Allen Boyd, editor, proprietor of the Nashville Globe. Dr. A.M. Curtis, former president, National Medical Association, Washington, D.C. A.H. Grimke, president, Washington Branch, National Association of Advancement of Colored People. John R. Hawkins, financial secretary, AME Church, Washington, D.C. Dr. Walter H. Brooks, pastor, 19th Street Baptist Church, Washington, D.C. James A. Cobb, former assistant, U.S. District Attorney, Washington, D.C. George W. Cook, secretary of Howard University. Roscoe Bruce. Roscoe Bruce. Come on up, Baba, and grab a chair up here. Grab a chair.
I'm just going to the bookcase, they all in here.
Well, bring a chair up there with you then. It's any kind of chair you can have.
That Bruce Monroe?
Yeah, that's Roscoe Bruce, assistant superintendent. That's the one who the Boule demonstrated 20,000 people. I know some of you all were not here a couple of weeks ago, but there's a tape over there that just says Steve Copley. It has no name on it. It has no title on it. But it was part 4 in the Mysterious Deaths in New World Order. For those of you who wanted Mysterious Deaths 1, 2, and 3, I have some sets of those for $30 for all 3. You can add the 4th one for $40. The 4th one, again, has no name, but they have those earlier memos that I read about the Boule being attacked in 1919 and Roscoe Bruce being looked at as a threat to the stability of the parent league, because we had the Washington Times here which showed that 20,000 people were protesting against the Boule, stating that it potentially could dominate the public school system in Washington, D.C.
Star of the time.
Huh?
Star of the time.
The Washington Star, I'm sorry. I think which eventually became the Washington Post.
Then you had the Washington Bee.
You had the Washington Bee. What was when did the Washington Post start?
Graham bought it. He bought it in 30, back around 33, something like that.
Okay. I wanted to just remind you of this. For those that weren't here, that particular day, I just want to hold the article up to the camera. And again, this is the memorandums where Du Bois becomes the first man ever to write in Foreign Affairs. And the correspondence between him and the editors of Foreign Affairs telling him exactly what they wanted him to delete, what tone they were willing to accept from him. And if he did those things, they then would print his story. I had it out here earlier. We read you the memo where they were trying to figure out what is the Boule, and military intelligence trying to figure out what the Boule is. And we had that statement from one of the people saying that the man wouldn't take the oath because the oath was so abominable that no right-thinking black man would take such an oath. And that the person who was informing military intelligence said that he would not join the organization because of the treachery of the oath. And of course, we still trying to get the oath because we believe that it's very important. One of the chief things that came out of that meeting with those people, and I haven't finished reading the names, was this, which you can find in page 293 of Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, highlighted 8 Negroes write letter to Attorney General and white press misrepresenting Garvey and movement. Tried to make out that there is hatred taught by Garvey and UNIA. UNIA and Garvey stand for love and human brotherhood. White people well know that the Negro is his own enemy. Action of 8 traitors proved the same to be true. All broad-minded white people are in sympathy with UNIA to help race improve itself. Reprint from the Negro World. Not only does the Negro World, not only did they print the names and philosophy opinions of those who attended the meeting, but it accurately projected the fact that those Negroes went right on out in their role of identifying potential dissatisfaction among the Negro. You could see why they would all be turning in Garvey's name, since their role was to scout out such dissatisfaction. Anyway, let me just read these names, and then I want to introduce Brother Donald Smith. Roscoe Bruce, John Dancy, Secretary, Church Extension Board, AME Zion Church, Washington, D.C. PBS Pinchback, former governor, state of Louisiana, Washington, D.C. Y'all heard of Pinchback?
Yeah.
What's up with Pinch? I ain't hit the Pinchback.
Only black governor we ever had. He was had to get in.
There was another one in Massachusetts. Remember that black governor in Massachusetts?
Massachusetts.
Well, anyway, we'll just say that he potentially could have been the first black governor. Sister says it may have been another black, it was a black senator? Okay, senator. Okay, so what's his name? Pinchback, former governor of the state of Louisiana.
Governor.
Okay.
He got in and it's funny, he got in and was in a little while or something. He wasn't long stint.
2 years or so.
2 years. How did you get in?
Lieutenant governor and somebody died and stuff.
And he was lieutenant governor for a year.
Y'all pretty good with the black history. Pinchback.
Black facts, man.
Damn, got a bunch of listings of Pinchback in the book.
500.
All these. Which one is he? Pickney Pinchback, or Walter Pinchback, or William Pinchback? Damn, there's a bunch of Pinchbacks. It's my bad. See if I could get to be some shit governor. Those were the list of the people attending, and of course I'm surprised that Moulton was there, Minton, because I even had this shit and I'm going through it with you. I still got more of this stuff I haven't all gotten to, and I know I'm not even going to get to all of it tonight. But it's just loaded with stuff. Invited but unable to attend William H. Lewis, former Assistant U.S. Attorney General, of Law, Boston, Massachusetts. William Monroe Trotter, editor of The Guardian in Boston. And Kelly Miller, Dean of Arts and Business and Sciences at Howard University. Emmitt Scott, Secretary of War, and it was signed by Emmitt Scott and Major Spingarn. Major Moulton, Tuskegee Institute. On your way to New York is June 25th. This is from Churchill. On your way to New York, could you come in here to Washington for an important matter? Please telegram me. This is Churchill, head of military intelligence, to Moulton. From Chief Intelligence Branch, Executive Division, Intelligence Officer Camp Dix, subject consultation with officers. Major Spingarn, representing this branch, will visit Camp Dix during the week beginning July 1st for the purpose of consultation with the following officers now attached to the Department Brigade. And it lists all of the officers who were black at that period. Memorandum for Colonel Churchill, subject, changed attitude of colored press, from Spingarn. I am enclosing an editorial from the July crisis as indicating the general change in the tone of the colored press. It has occurred to me that you may be interested in this evidence of the effect of military intelligence policy. Signed by James Spingarn. Here is the editorial, July 18th. When was the meeting they had?
June 12th.
July 19th. Was it June 19th to the 21st? So now we're in July. Du Bois has put out his editorial, modifying his tone and his focus. Closing ranks, his famous editorial. This is the crisis of the world. For all the long years to come, men will point to the year 1918 as the great day of decision. The day when the world decided whether it would submit to military despotism and an endless armed peace, if peace it could be called, or whether they would put down the menace of German militarism and inaugurate the United States of the world. We of the colored race have no ordinary interest in the outcome. That which the German power represents today spells death to the aspirations of Negroes and all darker races for equality, freedom, and democracy. Let us not hesitate. Let us, while this war lasts, forget our special grievances and close our ranks shoulder to shoulder with our own white fellow citizens and the allied nations that are fighting for democracy. We make no ordinary sacrifice, but we make it gladly and willingly with our eyes lifted to the hills. War-saving stamps. Correspondent writes us, has there been put in operation any effective machinery for bringing our 12 million colored citizens, especially those living in the southern states, into this great national movement for thrift and economic representation by war-saving stamp movement? This movement is to have a profound effect on the character of the American people. Millions of shiftless Americans are going to learn their first lessons in thrift and economy through buying thrift stamps and war-saving stamps. It is obvious that our colored citizens should share to the full benefits as well as the responsibilities of the movement. It is a voluntary effort. Thousands of voluntary committees are working to inoculate the lessons of thrift and inspire voluntary purchase of stamps. We are glad to say that such a movement has begun. Various organizations are taking hold, and the NAACP will use its more than 30,000 members in its 108 branches to push this splendid movement. Remember, June 28th is National War Savings Day. And he goes on to talk about common schools and other things. Mr. Robert Moulton from Von Demand, your letter of September 12th just received. I desire to thank you for writing me. For the information contained in your letter, I shall write at once to Dr. Ronan of Nashville and ask him to tell me what he feels at liberty to tell me concerning the letter from New York. It is needless to say that your name will not appear in this matter. Please let me have any additional information which may come to you from time to time, which may give us a lead that will show us whether there are any German propaganda at work among our colored population. Von Dieman, September 18, 1917, that's a year earlier, to Moulton. Dear Mr. C.V. Ronan, I have just been informed that you have recently received a letter from New York from an organizer of a society of colored anarchists. This office is investigating matters of this kind, which may have to do with German propaganda in this country. And it is thought that this man in New York may be connected with matters of this kind. At any rate, it is believed that he should be investigated. Would you be willing to give us the name and the address of this man in question? If possible, a copy of his letter. You may rest assured that your name will not be mentioned in this matter. Respectively, Von Dieman, Lieutenant Colonel, General Staff, Chief of Military Intelligence Section. John Shilady, NAACP, from Churchill. Dear Sir, this office desires a list of all of the officers of the NAACP, including the officers of all of its branches throughout the United States, and we would be glad to receive such a list at your earliest convenience. It is also highly desirable that you communicate with Major Spingarn of this branch whenever you may happen to be in Washington. By Churchill to John Shilady, Secretary NAACP, and of course I just read you the letter where Shilady sent him the names. In Philosophy and Opinions, as Marcus Garvey reads the names of those who wrote the letter, he says these are the people who signed the letter against Marcus Garvey. And Garvey says they have no personal ends or partisan interest to serve, nor are they moved by any personal bias against Marcus Garvey. Oh, this is what they said in the letter. They sound this only because they foresee the gathering storm of race prejudice and sense the imminent menace of this insidious movement, which cancer-like is gnawing at the very vitals of peace and safety, and of civic harmony and interracial concord. The signers of the letters are Harry H. Pace, 2289 7th Avenue, New York, who helped set up the Atlanta chapter of the Boule. Robert S. Abbott, 3435 Indiana, Chicago, defender. John Nail of New York. Dr. Julian Coleman of New York. William Pickens of New York. Chandler Owen of New York. Robert Bagnell of New York. George Harris of New York. Harry Pace is president of Pace Phonograph Corporation. I told you he was the first man in America to make a phonograph. Robert Abbott is editor of Defender. Nail is president of Nail and Parker. Julia Coleman is president of Hair Vim Chemical. William Pickens is field secretary of the NAACP. Chandler Owens is co-editor of The Messenger and co-executive secretary of Friends of the Negro Freedom, which I believe was like a black socialist group. Robert Bagnell is director of branches at NAACP. George Harris, member of the board of aldermen of New York, editor of the New York News. Address reply to Chandler Owens, secretary of the committee. Let us consider the above letter as written by these wicked Negroes, sent to the Attorney General of the United States of America and to the white press of the nation. In the first paragraph of the above communications, the writers, being Negroes, made use of the following statement. Speaking of Attorney General, they say, as Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the nation, we wish to call to your attention a heretofore unconsidered menace to the harmonious race relations. There are in our midst certain Negroes, potential murderers, some American-born who are some by intense hatred against the white race. These undesirables proclaim that all white people are enemies of the Negroes. Said Garvey, good old darkies. To imagine that any group of Negroes could attempt to impress not only the Attorney of the United States, but white people, members of their own race, although this some of murdering members of the white race of hatred against them, knowing well the position in America and his relationship with his white brothers, that one can expect at this time to some uplift. Everyone knows that the statement is manufactured by these wicked, malicious, insidious Negroes for the purpose of directing the hatred of the Attorney General and white people against the universal Negro improvement, universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey and against Marcus Garvey. Look at these good old darkies. They believe that they can tell that they are telling it for all the world. Fabricators that they are. For everyone who knows the Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey knows well that there's absolutely no part to plot to murder anybody. And that as far as we're concerned, more are found probably among some, the letter, but some of it's cut off. Anyway, Garvey busted deep into that ass about the fact that they were trying to send him down, and of course there was that letter where Boule, here's the article, hint, Boule is mixed in Boule case, a Bruce case. Dr. C.M. Tanner says secret society must be probed by a school board. 20,000 people of the Parents League coming out against the Boule. And so Brother Donald looked up some things about Roscoe Bruce, who we see was at the meeting against Garvey, was there being one of the informants. We also know Bruce to be also associated with Howard and other things. What did you learn about Roscoe Bruce, brother?
He was the son of B.K. Bruce, the former senator during Reconstruction, during the Reconstruction period. Before Bruce was the assistant of D.C. colored schools, as they were called, the former senator was. And the problem that existed was within the school system was that the charges that he was brought up against was that there was a clique going on, and the folks that were being given jobs within the D.C. public schools and the colored schools were primarily those people of their particular social status or of their particular caste, because they talked about themselves as a caste system. And what was happening was that it was favoritism going on. There were folks that were associated with Murray Church Terrell, Robert Terrell, those that was considered the upper class black folks in Washington, D.C. They were primarily bringing within the school system those people that they were associated with within their circle. And they got to a point that the parents realized that it wasn't just people that was in their circle, but their circle was one of members of the most exclusive group of organizations within Washington, D.C., which was the Boule. What I read, they didn't specifically say the Boule, but everyone that was associated with the D.C. colored schools were members of the Boule. And that brought about the charges and the upheaval of the parents. But what's unique about D.C. Boule is that the Woomsley family in D.C. is a very prominent family. One of the
spell her name.
I think that's
W-O-S-M-E-L-E-Y, something like that.
Yeah.
Wormsley or Wormsley? Wormsley. W-O-R.
One of them croaked, I believe, sometime this year.
Right, but somebody married into that family. You know who married into that family? Minton, right. There you go.
And
so you had all hooks up.
And the way it worked was that just as you have the Rockefellers and other folks married within the families, the Boule followed the same pattern. That all over the country, Boule members were married. There was Philadelphia was married into D.C. and D.C. was married into Baltimore, and it went straight across the board all over the country. That they married within their own so-called class system. If you had $75,000, then you was considered upper class black person, and that's how they associated. I mean, it was a really tight clique. If I lived in Washington D.C. and I was in a Boule and I went down to Tennessee, I stayed with Robert R. I stayed with the churches, and that's how it worked all around the country, and that's how they networked. And D.C. have always been the major hub place,
the
intellectual hub place of the light, bright, and damn near white, because that's what was going on back then, and that was the problem. One of the problems that was within D.C. schools, that they shunned anyone who primarily was a dark-skinned person, did not get into the D.C. Colored school system as a teacher. It was primarily of those who did not meet the brown paper bag standard. And some were able to get into the society, like Kellen Miller, who's at Howard, also associated with D.C. colored schools. And they had a fight they fought amongst each other as far as they had different little social organizations or clubs that existed in Washington, D.C., and they fought like niggas. What club was the best club, and they would put on balls and things like that, and one would outdo the other, and some of the social elite wouldn't go to these other ones because of these other folks. I mean, it was just total chaos and craziness, and the pattern that they patterned themselves off was off of white people.
What's the book you brought?
The name of the book is called The Aristocrats of Color by Willard B. Gatewood. I mean, it goes in depth into the mindset of these people, which goes back pre-Emancipation Proclamation, 1865. These were the descendants of the children of the slave masters. That they sent their children up north to be educated. Some of these folks were they pride themselves off of their lineage and their heritage. Particularly if you were what was considered a free Negro before Abe did his thing, and they prided themselves on their white fathers who were plantation overseers and their plantation master parents, and they traced their lineage back to who was the white great-great-grandfather, and bring it on up to the period of time, and they still act that way today. When we went to the Boule convention, we saw a lot of light-skinned, old, gray-haired, white-looking people that were in the room.
With what color eyes?
And they were
predominantly. Ain't nobody in here that's like that. They were just flocks. I ain't never seen that many light-skinned old folks in my life. I ain't know the color thing. But they was all over the place with green eyes and blue eyes.
Real blue eyes.
And that's the mindset of the Boule, and that still exists. It still exists to this day. That they had, as far as the majority of the masses of the people in this room, you were something that they cursed and they spat upon. You were something what it was talked about in the book African Americans and Jewish elites from 1910 to 1930. What they talked about, Alain Locke talked about the dumb dark masses.
Right.
We were.
And that line dealt with the fact that whether Garvey was better right, and the dumb dark masses knew more about what they should have done with Garvey than we, the elite. We didn't catch on until after the dumb dark masses.
And the Boule mindset is that the masses that was primarily coming up out of the South was responsible for the racial hatred or the white supremacy that white folks were practicing against black folks, because as far as they were concerned, we were uncouth, unclean, and their job and responsibility was to civilize us. And that goes into the period of the founding of the Urban League, because the Urban League was an organization that was primarily to teach black folks coming up out of the South how to not to assimilate, but to be able to deal with the things of brushing your teeth and hygiene and those other kind of things. That's how they saw it.
Civilized, to be civilized.
And that's how they saw it.
Socialized, civilized.
And that's how they saw it. So that was the type of patterns that exist. I mean, I ain't got time. I can go into detail with a lot of, but these are some real sick people with still sick problems, and they still that way today. Because they pride themselves off of that pattern, and it still exists in every city across the country.
Let me do this. I need to pass the hat while brother's talking. What happened there? Oh, no. For those of you that can't help, I need your support. Brother Donald, the Aristocrats, what else can you tell us about Bruce? And this whole, is there anything in there about the Boule and this?
Oh yeah, got a lot about the Boule.
Is there anything about Bruce and the Boule and this thing with Howard and the parents?
It didn't go in, it went into a little bit of the story, but it didn't go into the Boule. It just talked about it even talked about in the book, they cut down the number of returns that were raised by what was going on after the school, but it didn't go into, give as much information as we did in the speech. But
In fact, let me say something. It says the Aristocrats of Color, the Black Elite from 1880 to 1920, which is like the period we're trying to talk about now, 1880 to 1920. And what's interesting in that is that one of the things that now I know what I got to do. But one of the things I had wanted to get into the record, I read you about the migration during that period. I didn't get to Carter T. Woodson yet. This is phenomenal. Really is what Carol Quigley in his book, excuse me, Brother Bud. Now, how did that fool get back there? Who was that I gave the book to?
I know, I sure like to look at it.
You put it back up here? How did he get back there? Huh? Okay. You sit in the box. In his book, Tragedy and Hope. Yeah, bro, thanks. In the book, Tragedy and Hope, I want you to hear this. I want you to hear this. Carol Quigley gives a description of the United States in 1917. You got to match that in with all these things we're talking about. Now let's go to Carol Quigley in 1917. Just as classical culture spread westward from the Greeks who entered into the Roman peoples who adopted and changed it, so Europe culture spread westward to the New World, where it was profoundly modified while still remaining basically European. The central fact of American history is that people of European origin and culture came to and to use the immensely rich wilderness between the Atlantic and the Pacific. In this process, the wilderness was developed and exploited area by area. The Tidewater, the Piedmont, the Trans-Appalachian Forest, the Trans-Mississippi Prairies, the Pacific Coast, and finally the Great Plains. By the 1900s, the period of occupation, which had begun in 1607, was finished. In the era of development continued in an intensive rather than extensive context. In other words, he's saying it took America from 1607 to 1900 to conquer from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean internally. Once they had conquered or grabbed it area by area, the fight was no longer external, it was internal. We were intensive rather than extensive. This shift from extensive to intensive development was frequently called, quote, the closing of the frontier, and required a readjustment of social outlook and behavior from a largely individualistic to a more cooperative basis. In other words, the hunky had to say, well, we have to let these niggas go. We have to let the niggas go. They're escaping. We'll let the niggas go. If we can rethink our relationship with niggas, we don't need to slave all of them, just some of them. We don't need to educate all of them, just a tenth of them. You can see that they're now going through this transformation about how they see their relationship with the Irish, the Italians. They start to assimilate the lesser of the white cultures amongst white thinking. So this transformation, this decision. Now, interestingly enough, he goes on to say, very interesting thing he brought up. Say, you know, in the period between he says, the occupation of the United States had given rise to three chief geographical sections: a commercial and later financial and industrial east, an agrarian and later industrial west, and an agrarian south. Unfortunately, the two agrarian sections were organized quite differently. The South on the basis of slave labor, the West on the basis of free labor. On the question, the East allied with the West to defeat the South. In the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, occupied, and to subject it to prolonged military occupation as a conquered territory from 1865 to 1877. Since the war and the occupation were controlled by the new Republican Party, the political organization of the country became split on sectional basis. The South refused to vote Republican until 1938. The West refused to vote Democrat until 1932. In the East, the older families, which inclined towards the Republican Party because of the Civil War, were largely submerged by waves of new immigrants from Europe, beginning with Irish and Germans after 1846, and continuing with even greater numbers from Eastern Europe and Mediterranean Europe after 1890. Then it says, the arrival of mass democracy after 1830 changed this situation, establishing the use of party conventions. Says the rich and the powerful used to dominate the early political parties. Said, but then they started making voting for everybody, so now there was mass politics. In the era of mass politics, the rich didn't believe they could control the political dynamic as well as they could when only a few people could vote. It says now they were using democratic conventions and party conventions for nomination and the use of entrenched political party machines supported on the patronage of public office to mobilize sufficient votes to elect the candidates. So this gave rise to the first of the machines in politics. The rich say these machines were a threat to our vitality because we couldn't control, says this was a fairly workable system since the three forces were approximately equal. The advantage of any rested with the party machine. This advantage became so great in the period of 1865 to 1880 that the forces of finance, commerce, and industry were forced to contribute ever increasingly large monies to the political machines in order to obtain the services from government which they regarded as their due. Services such as highest tariffs, land grants, and railroads, better postal services, and mining and timber concessions. The fact that these forces of finance and business were themselves growing in wealth and power made them increasingly restive under the need to make constantly larger contributions to political machines. Moreover, these economic tycoons increasingly felt it to be unseemly that they should be unable to issue orders, but instead had to negotiate as equals to obtain these services from party bosses, and they resented it. Therefore, listen to this, by the late 1870s, business leaders determined to make an end to this situation by cutting with one blow the tar root of the system of party machines, namely the patronage system. I told you that when Harold Washington became mayor, one thing they made him do was to give away the patronage control, where all 40,000 city government employees were patronage under the will of the mayor. When the black man became the mayor, they cut what they call his positions down to 900. That only 900 people in government could the mayor select himself. I had one of them 900 positions. But the point was that every time black man got the spot of patronage by which one kisses your ass was always taken away from the strength of black man, which is why Barry can't do what? Because what? People would kiss his ass. And that ain't the ass they want to kiss when they got financial control board and other things. Check, 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 check. Right, now, listen to this. It says by 1870, business leaders didn't like this spoil system. So they set out independent of business control by giving them source of income. So they had to break the source of income where the parties was getting self-money for themselves because they were shaking down people they gave a job to. With this aim, the civil service reform began in the federal government with the Telephone Bill in 1883. As a result, the government was controlled with varying degrees by the forces of investment banking in every industry from 1884 to 1933. This period, 1884 to 1933, was a period of financial the railroading and heavy industry, and on the other were able to mobilize enormous wealth and build enormous economic and social power, particularly popularly known as the Society or the 400. Now twice I catch quickly mentioning the Committee of 300 or the Society of 400, which draws parallel to...
DC had the Black 400. They had the Black 400 here in DC. That's what they call themselves, the Black 400. One thing I'm looking through this list of DC and Baltimore is that historically they have primarily lived in certain areas within the city. Only. In Baltimore, it was from the 800 to about the 20-something hundred block of Drill Avenue. Now it's primarily up in the area where I live at.
Hold on, bro. Okay, hold on. We don't want to miss where they live with this information on heavy finance. The structure of the financial controls listen to this now, listen to this, it's heavy. The structure of financial controls created by the tycoons of big business and big government, big banking and big business in the period of 1880 to 1933 was of extraordinary complexity. One business being built on another, being both allied with semi-independent associates. The whole rearing upward into two pinnacles of economic and financial power, of which one centered in New York, headed by J.P. Morgan and Company, and the other in Ohio, headed by the Rockefeller family. When these two cooperated as they generally did, they could influence the economic life of the country to a large degree and could almost control its political life, at least on the federal level. The former point, which can be illustrated by a few facts: United States, the number of billion-dollar corporations rose from 1 in 1909. $1 billion corporation in all the United States in 1909, which was U.S. Steel, controlled by the Morgans, to 15 in 1930. The share of all corporation assets held by the 200 largest corporations rose from 32% in 1909 to 49% in 1930, and reached 57% by 1939. By 1930, the 200 largest corporations held 49.2% of the assets of all 40,000 corporations in the country, 81 billion out of 165 billion. They held 38% of all business wealth, incorporated or unincorporated, or 81 billion out of 212 billion, and they held 22% of all wealth in the country, or 81 billion out of 367 billion. In fact, by 1930, one corporation, American Telephone and Telegraph, controlled by Morgan, or AT&T, had the greatest assets of the total wealth of over 21 states in the Union. The influence of these business leaders was so great that Morgan and Rockefeller groups acting together, or even Morgan acting alone, could have wrecked the economic system of the country merely by throwing securities on the stock market for sale and having they precipitated a stock market panic, could have brought down the securities they had sold at a lower price. Naturally, they were not so foolish to do this, and it goes on to explain their relationships with other things. But eventually, and I'll get a little into this next week, about the huge alliances. Morgan controlled 894 corporations. So if you had 894 corporations circling around one man, you had another guy at 600-some corporations circling around him. You look up 8, 9 guys. You got 40,000 corporations by registration. You probably got 30,000 of them ain't bigger than 10 people, and you got the rest of them controlled by 10 more people. Anyway, the examination of wealth during that period is awesome. And yes, somebody said it's still like that. And of course, in the book by West, Brother Arnold, do you remember? That's the now, brother. You fella look Greg look like a student at school. He looks up, teacher catch him talking, he looks up. Yeah, look at that. Now, don't be turning him on. Don't get him started.
Good question.
Huh?
You asked me a question.
Okay. When he comes to your lecture, then you can ask him. Come on, now who's doing the wooing and stuff? Who's saying woo and shit? The wooing shit ain't right. But anyway, one thing here in this Gates in the book, they put their whole thing on Du Bois and the Talented Tenth. They had an examination of wealth. And one of the things they said was that 20% of the people control 80% of the wealth. And so I took that in reverse. That meant that by their standards that 80% of the people had to split 20% of the wealth.
Yeah.
In reverse. So he's talking about the Talented Tenth and their role of seeing Gates and what's called. I'm going to pass the hat. Is there some you need to say very particularly? Listen, as I mentioned you all earlier, they canceled my little lecture in New York this week, so I'm truly behind. And due to the thanks of a couple of people in this room, I really had to borrow just to be able to be here this week, to be able to sustain yourself when you get locked out. And I'll tell you something weird happened. I need to say this again for those of you who came late. I was to be off to New York the day after the march, and we're going to hear from Brother Roland next, and then Brother Greg to go to get a lecture. But Eric Muhammad canceled me out of the lecture. He still had it. But his dialogue was real strange, real eerie, like, brother, you shouldn't come up here tomorrow. I don't think it would be good for you to be here. And it just didn't make no sense. Unless something happened. Something happened. And I don't know what it was, and I don't even care to find out, because he on suspension. So you know how he been fucking being exiled when he been in suspension with Steve. Anyway, tape's almost over. Anyway, one of the things that I wanted to say before the tape was over was I wanted a brother, if you could read this into the record for me, I would greatly appreciate it. This is Carter G. Woodson being asked about taking some money. Read that little part right there, being asked about taking some money, and he decides he ain't gonna take it because of the influence whites want over his direction for giving him the money. Anyway, those of you who can help, I really appreciate you.
In early 1919, Woodson launched a $20,000 fundraising drive. By March, he had raised $1,200, all of it contributed by whites. He appealed again to the Rockefeller Foundation.
Thank you, brother. Uh-oh. Damn, what you got?
$2,000 to fund a $2,000 salary for a business agent to sell subscriptions of the journal, but was turned down. Although Woodson tried to, Woodson relied primarily on the whites to finance the journal, he retained his independence. Many wealthy whites contributed through thought that blacks should give more to finance the journal, and Woodson agreed, believing that as long as whites provided the majority of funds, there would be a danger that they would try to influence editorial policy, interfere with his administration, to involve more blacks in the association. He invited several black scholars to present papers on blacks in World War I. At the second biannual meeting of the association in June 1919, he persisted efforts to convince black scholars to contribute funds to the association. Paid off. Eventually, he received $25 per year from half a dozen black scholars. At the 1919 meeting, Woodson made only slightly personal changes.
Okay, well, Carter G. Woodson had on his board, Scott Papers, addition to regular contributions, he got contributions from Rosenwald, Swift, Story Hall, Phelps Stokes Fund. Woodson also received money from the Slater Fund, Jacob Sharif, Cleveland Dodge, Henry Hornblower, and Catherine Du Bois. So much in here is really powerful. Woodson was not the only teacher to criticize Bruce. Garnett Wilkerson and others at the two schools also complained that his duplication of course offerings wasted funds, estimating that it would take $450,000 to $500,000 to modernize Armstrong. Woodson suggested that the old M Street building be converted into annex for auto repair and for cleaning and for other things. Although he was newly appointed at Howard, Emmitt Scott worked with Woodson on the project to produce a history of blacks in World War I. Scott commanded influence with the university's board of trustees. He may have persuaded Woodson to accept the position of dean of the university's School of Liberal Arts. And Woodson was so outstanding. Woodson's appointment to Howard was a part of a major reorganization plan implemented by the university's new white president, J. Stanley Durkee. After consulting with the board of trustees, faculty members, and administrations, Durkee recruited Emmitt Scott, Woodson, and other talented blacks. He also upgraded the curriculum and increased the course offerings. Woodson replaced Kelly Miller, whom Durkee had demoted to the position of dean of the junior college. He demoted Miller for Miller standing up and writing an editorial to defend Roscoe Bruce in the Washington Times. He punishes Miller. He's going to fire Miller for defending him. Instead, he suspends him. Because all of these guys in the secret societies couldn't get fired by the guy Durkee. Even though Durkee, who was white, didn't like these intellectual Negroes, and he brought them to the school, he couldn't control them well. So his problem was he used Moorland as the ultimate mediator between the hostile Negro intellectuals and the white leaders of Howard. And it says Woodson, when he got to Howard, they were expanding. Charles Wesley had been teaching history at Howard since 1913, was developing courses in Negro history. Alain Locke was brought into the philosophy department, was developing courses in race relations. Alain Locke. Man, I just don't have enough time to get all of this shit in. I looked up Locke and the Negro history thing, and there was an interesting thing said that Locke, not only was he chosen to be the first Black Rhodes Scholar, and you'll never know how well they play it up till you hear how they mention it here about the two Boules. As a child, Alain Locke was nurtured in genteel and cultivated environment. His daddy was the private secretary to General O. Howard, who was the head of Howard. Right. So Alain Locke is being groomed in privilege. His dad is already up there, and he's nurtured in genteel and cultivated environment. He went to Central High School in Philly, graduated second in his class, BA in honors, 1902-1904, studied Philadelphia School of Pedagogy. Studied at Philadelphia School of Pedagogy, first in his class. Then he entered Harvard, completed a 4-year course. Locke won the college's most prestigious prize, the Bowdoin Prize, for an essay in English. Elected to Phi Beta Kappa 1907, bachelor's degree magna cum laude. Then it says, in his senior year, Locke passed the qualifying examination in Latin, Greek, and mathematics for the Rhodes Scholarship, which had been established in 1904. When he was selected after the oral examination in Philly as a Rhodes Scholar from Pennsylvania, Locke achieved a distinction that was to set him apart for the remainder of his life. In addition to the intrinsic prestige associated with the Rhodes Scholarship, was the first honor of being the first Negro selected. During his lifetime, he remained the only Negro in the Rhodes Scholar program. The impact of his selection in 1907 was particularly dramatic because of the efforts of many white scholars, especially psychologists, to prove the intellectual inferiority of the Negro, which is back on the set right now. The inferiority of the Negro by the white psychologists. A symbol, Locke thus became a symbol of youthful Negro intellectual achievement, justifying those who urged Negroes to be given the equal opportunity to enter white educational institutions and intellectually demanding professions. Rebuffed by 5 Oxford colleges, which under the agreement establishing the Rhodes Scholarships retained the right of admission, Locke was finally admitted to Hertford College, where he studied philosophy, Greek, and Literae Humanities, something like that, from 1907 to 1910, and then attended the University of Berlin from 1910 to 1911. Although he spent 3 years in Europe, were not entirely free of radical prejudice. Indeed, he encountered at Oxford, they opened Locke to new perspectives in viewing the American society and culture. Locke developed in Europe a global conception for the race problem and a corresponding interest in Africa and the problems of non-white colonies elsewhere. While at Oxford, he met many Africans and was the founder of the African Union Society. Now, I suspect that we better find out what the fuck that thing did, because it says he took all the other Africans he found and they hooked up in this African Union Society. Brother David, you think you could look that up for us? All right. The African Union Society. The society constitution said that it was to be the medium for cultivating thought and intercourse between its members as prospective leaders of the African race, and to encourage a wide interest in such matters as to affect the welfare of the race in Africa and in other parts of the world. It's about the merging leadership. 1912, Locke returned to the United States.
Tape.
Damn, and I had to stop there because I ain't got no more tape to put in there. But it goes on to hook Locke in with Moorland, Carter G. Woodson, as they all come together. Now, I really want to go on into the CIA drug story, but I must open up next week's lecture I must take you back to these memos, and I take you back to old boy Carter G. Woodson, because there's so much to learn about the white philanthropists during that period. This is a letter from, I want to read you this letter from Moulton. I want you to hear this here. Letter from Moulton. This is about that letter in New York that everybody was getting, and the military intelligence want to know who is there sending this letter around, the militant anarchists. This is Moulton's letter to Von de Man. Dear sir, I promise I will write you frankly in anything that occurred to me that would be of service to you in handling the affairs of the department. You promise me also that whatever I write will be held in strictest confidence. You must know, of course, that however confidential one may desire to be in matters of this kind, there is always more or less reluctance in putting on paper things that one would express face to face. I understand that a very prominent Negro physician Dr. C.V. Ronan in Nashville recently received a letter from a colored man in New York, the organizer of a society of colored anarchists with a view, of course, to opposing the government in a rather militant way. In this communication, this man asked Dr. Ronan's cooperation and help and gave as his reason the treatment of the Negro has received from the government, etc. Ronan replied as any patriotic American citizen would, that the best way for this man to help his race would be to be loyal to the government and to disband his non-sensual society. If you would address a letter to Dr. C.V. Ronan, Nashville, Tennessee, he will probably get his reply, perhaps a copy of the letter. And of course, I read to you a minute ago him asking for that letter, and that's in that tape that has no name in it. I'll just have to stop there for tonight and finish this next week with the future of the race with Wes and Gates, Alain Locke, Moulton. I need to read you a little bit of Alain Locke and Moulton, and Woodson, Moorland, and Du Bois, how they interlocked in the setting up of the knuckleheaded Negro connection, and why Woodson broke away. I know some of you are saying, well, shit, if that's next week's lecture, I ain't coming, because we want to hear that. Interesting here, as in the back of the book, they show you how old boys know about the Boule. This is Gates and West showing Du Bois thing. Oh, come on up, Roland. Come on up, Roland. Come on up, Roland. Greg, how was Get on the Bus? Brother Greg saw Get on the Bus.
It was good. It was good.
Good movie?
It was funny. You know, it was entertaining.
Funny?
Yeah.
Would you recommend us seeing it?
Yeah.
Greg is our resident media reviewer. That's not funny. Shit, we're going to have a national magazine, print 3,000 copies a month. Greg, I'm going to ask Greg if he would be the movie reviewer in this magazine. This is going to be hot. I hope Sister Angela write poetry for the magazine.
I ain't like the gay part of the movie, though.
You had a gay part in the movie?
What? Yeah.
Okay.
Why was that white boy on the bus?
Well, I can't
He got off the bus
I can't
anyway.
tell you.
Anyway, Greg don't want to give away the story, but he recommends that the movie was good, and his recommendation was that I thought about the movie before that even happened. So that's appreciated.
Something happened to him too. I ain't Yeah.
Yes.
For the people that are not from Washington or who are not over 35, I just wanted you to know that all this that's going on with the Boule, and you know, in the beginning, it took place in this neighborhood. This was the most elite neighborhood in Washington at one time. Right here. And U Street
This was the place.
and 7th and T,
We're on the north side of Florida Avenue, which is the upper crust.
which was the Gold Coast at one time. You know, this neighborhood was the elite of the elite of Washington.
Those Victorian houses in this.
I think it's going to be another Georgetown.
Well, that's another thing when you were talking about M Street. Georgetown was originally a black neighborhood. I grew up in Georgetown in the 50s.
I think this is going to be a Georgetown.
You know?
I really do.
Yeah. It originally was a black neighborhood.
I think it's going to be a concentration camp.
Yeah. You all know, listen up. You all know on many, what's up, Brother Dragon? You all know on many occasions that we had the mayor of Georgia Avenue here. The mayor of Georgia Avenue passed. He came to many lectures. I always brought him up to speak. He wore the big brim hat, the shirt and tie. And he passed. I think his obituary is in one of the local black papers. The Informer, Brother Roland was up at the Million Man March last Wednesday. I asked if he could give us a review or a report of some of the things he saw. As you know, it was no C-SPAN coverage. It was very limited news coverage.
That's right.
I need to tell you that Winnie Mandela, who was not allowed to speak, out of 7 newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, all these newspapers I bought, Baltimore Sun, only out of 7 papers, only 2 of them even mentioned that Winnie Mandela was there. Only 1 of them mentioned that she couldn't speak. In one sentence, said Winnie Mandela couldn't speak on the request of the South African government.
In the United States.
No, it didn't say that in the story. That's what I'm saying. There's only one story you mentioned that. In other words, not only did somebody trick them from stopping her. We do trick them from stopping her from speaking. But the next day, they cleaned away the evidence of her being stopped out of the paper. And I will show you next week CNN cutting in live saying that Winnie Mandela can't speak. That was one cut in. Come back a little bit later, cut in says that Winnie Mandela can't speak, but the U.S. government has denied that their visa stops her from speaking. They gave her an unlimited visa. Next cut in, South African government denies that she's being stopped. That she's being stopped from speaking.
That's what it said up at the march, the same thing. It came in first, U.S. stopped her.
Then the U.S. denied it. See, that's how fast shit was going.
2 minutes later said, no, South Africa denied it.
And I bet you get to the bottom of that shit, I bet you that was a trick pulled by Ben Chavis. I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, I know how them niggas do it. They get up there, all Abraham Foxman want them to do. What did I tell you last week when we was here? I said the only damn thing that you would notice that would be of any value, the only person up there that wouldn't bite their tongue was Winnie Mandela. I said, fuck everything. That was the only thing gonna happen of value. And that's the one thing didn't happen. That's right. That's some shit. That's some shit. That's the one thing that didn't happen. Then bring her up on the stage and kind of lift her little arms and raise it down and shit. And she's standing there looking like, damn, what the fuck is going on? You can see stun in her face.
Nobody called to verify from the Million Man March or the Nation of Islam to the State Department or the damn South African Embassy. And I called and I checked. Them niggas didn't even call, man.
And that's probably because this was coming from on the stage. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, that's probably coming from up there.